Hello, everyone. Welcome to Nugget 2021, and thanks so much for joining our session today, covering the keys of building high-performing IT organizations. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. Today, we've got Duleep Wikramanayake. I'm hoping I said that right, Duleep, from SimonMed Imaging, and Matt Penner from Val Verde Unified School District. So Duleep, thanks so much for joining us again this year. It's great to have you back sharing your expertise. And Matt, thank you so much for joining us for the first time here at Nugget. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is pre-recorded, but our panelists have been kind enough to join us live today in the Nugget platform. So if you do have any questions while you're watching the session, feel free to ask them using the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. And Matt and Duleep will be answering them as you view the presentation. So both Matt and Duleep have been longtime Netrio users and have actually been successfully leading high-performing IT organizations for even longer. I think we're all excited to hear their thoughts on the keys to the keys to building those teams. So without further ado, let's get started here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course. All right, so I'd like to open up the first question to both of you. So before you can gauge whether or not your IT organization is performing at a high level, there has to be a way to measure performance. So how do you measure the success or performance of your IT organization? And are there key metrics or results that you're looking for? Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think before you can gauge that, you get the anecdotal kind of response, you get the gut check response, like, are people happy with the service you're providing? Are your leadership able to be able to make the decisions that's needed at their level, and can we support that? So it comes down to is our organization, is our department meeting our organization's mission? Are we able to anticipate the technology needed, the infrastructure, the data that we need in the near future? As a school district, laws are always changing, metrics are always changing. We're always finding new ways to analyze and make sure that we're helping our students as much as possible. It really comes down to, do we have the devices, the professional development, the know-how, and the data to back that up? And so I guess as far as key metrics go, before we dive in the nitty-gritty of Netrio, is are we able to basically successfully complete projects on time? Are we able to have a seat at the table to help anticipate what the vision should be regarding those projects that are upcoming? And also just in general, maintenance and serviceability. Are we able to adapt and quickly answer any questions or any issues that staff are having? So for those types of metrics, we're looking at everything. We're looking at our project dashboards. We're looking at our service management solution for our tickets. And of course, all of our network monitoring and everything else to ensure that the services that we're providing are always available, and anticipating any downtime they might be having due to issues or maintenance windows or anything like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Duleep, how about you?
I have a kind of a different take on it, right? So every time I walk into a job, I look at the noise level that's coming from the users. You know, how do we stack in terms of IT as an organization, right? And then you hear the complaints, and you look at everything that things are down or it's not performing well. And so how do you kind of get to that position, right? So and this is where working with Netrio has been kind of a joy for me. Bringing what I call chaos to calm. Right. So the first time we put something like Netrio on, and everybody doesn't believe what they see, because number of critical alerts that are so noisy. It is as noisy as the users who are complaining, right? And of course, my IT team would say, "Oh, this doesn't work. It can't be true," right? So in our last example, I think when you put Netrio on, I think we had 35,000 alerts. So you can imagine how bad the system was, right? And then right now we are going down to about 2,400 alerts a quarter. That's a far cry from where you are. So when you're putting a monitoring system, I said that is your key metric to kind of figure out, is the noise coming from your alerting system kind of match the noise that is coming from your user base? And I've always found out those things to be kind of true. And given our environment with so much network connectivity, so much WAN connectivity, people are complaining things are slow. The other thing that comes out of is the metrics that Matt was talking about, is that, okay, we are able to gauge every site and say, hey, is the line fast enough? Is it working, or is it working as as advertised by the the carrier. Hey, is the latency out there proper? So when you look at all these things, there's a huge value to any kind of monitoring, whether it's a small device or a critical device, because it will tell you the health of that device instantaneously. Right? So to maintain that performance, you need to know what's broken. How do you know what's broken? And this is where monitoring comes in really, really handy, right?
Fantastic. Great answers, guys. So Duleep, we'll keep it with you here. So we've had conversations in the past about tools and technologies that have been critical to your digital transformation initiatives. And SimonMed is the third organization you brought Netrio into. And I think you kind of touched on this in that first answer, but how do tools and technology fit into your playbook for building successful IT organizations?
Great question. So again, when you're bringing a monitoring system, it's just not the monitoring of the device, right? You're going to learn the baselines of each device and what it does, whether it's what is your threshold for storage, what is your threshold for memory before something starts reacting badly, what is the threshold for CPUs, what is the network connectivity that is required to do that. All those things, it's a guesswork unless you have something that says, hey, this is what I'm using. And at this level, when it goes to this level, I'm seeing a user performance that is related to that. So now you are able to take baselines and put those baselines, and based on those baselines, have alerts that say, well, if your storage is going to get so high, you can get in front of it earlier before the user finds out and fix that. Memory, same thing, before the user finds out, and that's the whole thing. It's being proactive, right? So getting those baselines are incredibly important in the monitoring system. Otherwise, the monitoring system will not work. I think this is where most people don't take time to really figure out the baselines. And those baselines are not generic. Those baselines are, very customizable to the device that you're monitoring or devices that you're monitoring. And then that's another second mistake that you don't want to make, because I think people will say, hey, our latency should be X across all lines. And that's not true, because depending on the distance, your latency could be, X plus something else. That's your norm. So you have to define your norms, right? And that's the baseline. So the key to success, in bringing, calm to that chaos is figuring out that baseline. And that takes time, so you have to be patient as you get that monitoring system up and running, and the noise is, pretty loud. We're going to figure out, okay, is this real noise or not? And then once your baselines are set up, that's when you start having, my example for people is like when I put Netrio on for the first time, everything was in red. I mean, it was ugly to look at. Now it's green. Now when you see a red spot, hey, that's a true problem, and you can get to it way faster than the user calling you and saying, hey, there's a problem.
Great. So, in Duleep, to bounce this off you again. So are there any other tools, so beyond monitoring, are there any other tools that you typically bring in when you're diving into an organization, really trying to uncover the nuts and bolts of where the issues might lie?
I mean, beyond monitoring, yeah, other tools you bring in is, is your service desk tool that Matt was talking about, because you want to have to correlate those tickets that you're getting from users to what's happening in your systems, right? So unless there's that correlation, it's very hard to say, okay, what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, and how do we take care of something in a very, very fast way, right? So the nice thing about Netrio is that, and we've been pushing Netrio for the last 8 years that I've been with them, to kind of make it better, right? Whether it's just a hardware ping, or whether it's, service reset, or, or looking into something, database related. So, so all these things at the end of the day, we as customers, need to kind of advise whoever we are using at that point to make sure, hey, make this more valuable for us, right? That's the whole key.
Great. Matt, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I guess obviously we're all technology people. That's what we eat and breathe every day. We love it. And what I always tell my organization is let us know what you want, right? Because we'll be happy to play with technology all day long, but that's not why we're getting paid. So the context comes down to me is what is the impact on the business? And so we're always dealing with way too much, right? And so how do you distill that? And like Duleep was saying, how do we cut through the noise? So we use a lot of different technology tools, and it could be the devices in the people's hands. It could be the monitoring systems. It could be our automations, things like that, to really help drive that conversation into how we can be better. And so, yeah, kind of look using NetTrio and some of those other arguments. Yeah, how do you get through the noise? How do you distill down to what's important? And so I take it back as I meet with my various departments. Our fiscal department could have very different requirements than our human resources department, and they'll have different requirements than our teachers in the classrooms. And as you're dealing with all those red signals and everything coming out of NetTrio, if we kind of know the hierarchy of what is critical when, because they all shift throughout the year, right? It helps us to really quickly narrow down in onto what do we need to accomplish first. And so something that's kind of interesting is obviously everyone likes to get paid, and we have payroll, and with the shutdown and people working from home, we had to very quickly pivot to helping our accounting teams and things like that, who were used to showing up every single day and being in the office, and how do they work from home, and using tools like NetTrio to make sure, is the accessibility there? Is the speed that they need, is the latency causing too much of an issue over our VPNs compared to what they were in the office? We have some tools that straight aren't available outside of our network. And so how do we ensure that that's available? And then as we're shifting, and like everyone was for 18 months there, technology left and right, making changes on the firewall, putting out new VPNs, and then distributing laptops to everybody who didn't have laptops before. I mean, there's conversations around, this is different. I know it's a computer, but now you're using cloud services much more than you used to. You don't have the printer right next to you, and things like that. And so as we're making changes, NetTrio was just absolutely wonderful, because we could tell as we were making changes, the services that were expected to keep up and running were still up and running. Or if something went down unexpectedly because of a firewall change, we could address that right away. And often we could do it before the end user even realized. I think IT has been tasked with so much. We always are, that's always the story. But certainly in the last 18 months, the last thing we wanted to do was cause an outage that the users found out before we did, right? Because that hurts our reputation a bit. In addition, we barely had time to solve the problem in the first place. If we don't know that there's an outage that we caused, how are we going to have time to solve that issue? So having a tool that we trust, like NetTrio, really helps us keep the business context in focus, if that makes sense. And because that's really what it's about at the end of the day. I always say we love to play with servers and everything else, and all the latest, whiz bang stuff that's out there, cloud services and new laptops and everything else. But in the end, I say we're not a technology department, we're a people department that happens to love technology. So having the tools in place to help us make sure that that's really true is really, I think, a pivotal part of why we're able to do what we do every day.
Well said.
Yeah, let me add to his story there, because he just brought up a phenomenal point with COVID. When you had to scale, right? We were very lucky that we had the hardware, so we could scale up end users remote, and we had the bandwidth to handle it. But we ran into an issue, and one of the issues we ran into was that we had a 10 gig connection to the internet, because we move a lot of data back and forth. However, we weren't using the full bandwidth in a way we are doing it right now with our remote users. So we never found a problem that was in our ISP that was capping us to 2 gigs, right? So suddenly when everybody went remote, we were having major issues, and then we when you looked at NetTrio, we said, hey, why is this 10 gig connection just flatlining at 2 gigs? And we found out it was an ISP issue. So here's a perfect example of, you're trying to scale out, you have everything that you need to Matt's point, but it wasn't scaling, even though everything was set up right. But on the ISP side, there was an issue, and there was huge amount of packet losses that was happening that they were not catching, and we were able to tell them, hey, there's something wrong with your line, and then go fix it, and then we were able to get that resolved. So Matt, you're right. None of us, we've already forgotten. 20 months ago, COVID hit, and and we were scrambling, right? For dear life, right? Okay, just take your computer home, do whatever you have to do to get working. We sent 600 people home and work remotely, right? So we did a lot of amazing things, but to sustain it, your monitoring tools come in very, very handy to make sure that that they're working as designed.
Amazing stories. That's great to hear. So Matt, I'm going to pass this next question to you. So I recently had the pleasure of conducting a case study interview with you and Brian Falk on your team. And during that interview, you mentioned the importance of IT having a seat at the table and bringing visibility to the impact that the IT organization or that IT has on the organization. So would you consider this a key to building high performing organizations, and how'd you go about it?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a key. I think in a lot of industries, we're starting to see more and more CTOs having a seat at the table, as they say, or being at that cabinet level. Still not at the level I'm sure Duleep and I would like to see in our colleagues. But I remember years ago, this was before DevOps and digital transformation had that moniker, right? But we've been doing this type of stuff for years. And I think in IT, we've been championing these sorts of data transitions for years. We just haven't had a lot of other departments understand what we could do. And so I was always, IT would wait until someone would come to ask them a question, and I would try and knock on doors, or I'd voluntarily invite myself to planning meetings if I was allowed to, and kind of seeing which ways IT could help out. And a lot of times IT, I think, is in a unique position that we tend to touch every single department in the organization. So we have a fairly good global view of who's doing what. And so sometimes we'll have insights like between fiscal and human resources, or between them and maintenance and facilities, or lots of these other departments. But I remember one time I was at a conference and they showed an IT maturity model. I was younger in that time, and one of the first times I'd seen that. And I think that was just such a fabulous thing, because it spoke to all of our journey, where I think level one, you're just putting out fires everywhere you can go. It's handling the help desk calls. And then level two was talking about putting practices in place. Well, maybe you're handling the fires consistently now, so that everyone's getting the same message. You're all using the same tactics or putting those things out. Level three was being a little more automated. Maybe we can anticipate things. I think that's where a trio comes in, right? Now we've got tools where we can kind of ensure that our infrastructure is doing what it's supposed to do, that we're seeing and meeting the expectations that we have for the equipment. Duleep kind of mentioned it perfectly there before. We could have all the equipment in place, but if something's hampering our expectation of it, now it's like, oh shoot, what's going on? And trying to identify that. Level four was strictly about, okay, now that we're doing all this, are we actually meeting the organization's goals? Again, if our mission is up here, is IT actually supporting that? And a lot of times that's where people stop. And but he revealed a fifth goal, and I thought, oh shoot, that's it. That matters right there. And he said that's where IT is literally at the table. You're part of cabinet. You're helping to define what that vision is. Because until that point, IT is doing hopefully really well what everyone is asking it to do, but you're still not there to help craft what IT can do, right, for that vision in the larger organization. And I think once you're able to have that key set, that's when the leadership and IT is a part of that, really have that collaboration together. I don't care if you're talking about, what's the new budget numbers for, facilities and painting. I don't care if it's, how are we handling those community outreach groups that we're dealing with our parents and our students, all the way down to, are we doing another laptop refresh? It doesn't have to be technology, but if IT is helping to craft some of that vision, then we're able to help define what the course is for technology and what we can provide, versus waiting until someone says, oh, I think IT might be able to do that. So I think as more and more companies are going through this digital transformation route, where they realize they are a technology company. I don't care if you're in fiscal services, healthcare, if you're in the entertainment industry, anything else, you're a technology company these days. And so if you have someone at the table who's in Duleep's position or mine, who can really help craft what that vision looks like in 2021, 2022, it really adds to the agility of the organization as a whole. So that is definitely something I champion. We're still making that transition here at our district, and we're helping other districts to make that transition. But I think the sooner that people kind of help include that voice and that mindset at the table, just the better and faster and more flexible we can be, because who knows what's happening next year. No one anticipated this. And not to pat ourselves on the back or anything like that at all, but I think it kind of showed that some organizations like SimonMed and others who were fairly flexible and had a good cohesive unit at the top were able to weather these changes much more quickly than some of those who had a little older traditional design. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Duleep, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, in building a high performance, IT, there's two things to that, right? I think the first thing I think we forget is the skills, the staffing, right? And with that skill is also the creating that accountability, and how do you create that accountability for people to do the right thing all the time, right? And I think this is where tools come in handy, where your work is portrayed by the number of or the less incidents that you have, right? And if somebody misconfigures something, your monitoring service should be able to pick that up and say, okay, there's something wrong down there, right? So I think it's a challenge today, right? Given one part is a challenge where it's hard to get skilled labor, but the other good thing is from COVID standpoint, I think more and more companies are now less averse to having remote staff, right? So I was able to, in the short period of time, since probably March of this year, to kind of build a team, and almost 99% of my staff that I've hired so far have been pretty much remote, right? They're all over the place, but as long as they can get to a computer securely, right? That's the key part. You got the skill set. So I've noticed that finding skills in locally in your area was so much more difficult. But today, you can really build a high performance team by just making sure your team is completely remote.
Great, thank you so much, Duleep. So this next question is for both of you. So we've talked a bit about performance measuring and tools and technology and bringing visibility to the IT organization. Are there any other pillars for success that either of you focus on when it comes to IT performance? Duleep, I'll open it up to you first.
Yeah, again, following best practices again, is definitely helps IT performance, right? Most of the younger generation that comes in, and I say that with a lot of fondness. They're passionate about what they want to do, but they're not used to the disciplines that came out from the mainframe world, where everything was, there was a lot of change control. There's a lot of good testing that went through. There was a lot of testing scripts. Today, we try to do things too fast. And eventually, the problem with that is that you can't scale. So when you're small, you can do that. But as you get larger and as you get to an enterprise level, those best practices really come in very handy in how you do things, right? So that's one of the things. Another thing in making sure that when you're building a high performance team is to follow best practices, regardless of what discipline in IT that is. We should always follow that, because there's always a good trail of what you did or what you didn't do.
Great. Matt?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Duleep said earlier about staffing. I think one common case, especially when the chaos starts happening, is people start saying, I'm overworked, I've got too much, there's too much to do, we need to hire more people. And that's a short-term fix. And I think if you have the luxury of hiring people, first of all, you have to assume that you've got the budget to pay for them. You've got to assume that people are out there who have the skills and are willing to work, because everyone's probably fighting for those people as well. And I think from an IT organization, this is a strong area where we can kind of step in and say, let's take a step back. And like Duleep said, if we're doing things too fast, it's hard to get a second to think. And I think a lot of us in the last, again, 18 months, I hate to bring that up again, but there's at least a lot of our communications seem to be a lot of repetition. Oh, this is what we already decided. Oh, remember if you do it this way. And so what we really started to need is tools, procedures that were much more intuitive, so that you didn't have to keep piling people into the problem. And again, there's I love people to death, but there's a finite resource to that, right? And so if we can invest in tools that are much easier to use, much more robust, and then also on the IT side, just invest in skills and the people that we do have in our engineers. So we've grown our engineer pool like crazy, whether they're on the network and operations side or on the application development side. And again, with the limited funds that the school district has, we've tried to champion the idea that an investment in IT is an investment in the whole organization. And so we've been able to really address some great problems and come up with some great solutions because we've had a larger just set of engineers who were developing and we're sending to training. I heard a great adage years ago, says, well, what if we train our staff and then they leave? Well, of course, the counter argument to that is, well, what if we don't and they stay? And so I would always love to have a rock star for 2 or 3 years, hopefully longer, and quite a bit often we have them longer, but a rock star for 2 or 3 years. And we grab their enthusiasm, we grab their knowledge and their ideas as they're shooting through us, than to have someone for 10 years who really is, disgruntled and depressed with his job and really doesn't, want to provide much value. He's somehow lost that connection to what we're doing. And so, yeah, investing in staff, investing in people. And I think that right there is your 10 times multiplier, your 100 times multiplier. We were able to draw back. And again, from an IT point of view, we see everything. So as you see, like we're able to introduce the concept of value stream mapping between some of our organizations and some of our departments. So something as simple as you've got a flat screen TV that's going out in the classroom. Well, we got 1,000 of these across the district. So you got to have a process and procedure in place, but that deals with our facilities department, deals with our maintenance department, deals with our purchasing department, of course, deals with IT. So we really started to come up with ideas on how do we shorten that window that when a teacher calls and says this is having a problem, that they get a fix right away. It could literally take a month or longer as the requests travel through different departments. But as IT was starting to learn best practices and ways around how do we take what sounds like a simple request, but it flows through multiple departments. How do we kind of use our knowledge of again, DevOps and everything else to kind of say, hey, let's bring our maintenance team into this question. Let's bring our teachers into this question. Are we buying the wrong equipment? Are we buying equipment that's easy to use? But yeah, metrics like that, it pulls it out of that, red and green day-to-day break fix. It's now, okay, well, if 30% of our metrics, 30% of our tickets aren't actually problems, it's more, user confusion, or maybe we need to invest in better systems. Maybe the systems that we evaluated and bought 3 years ago are no longer meeting the need because these days, like Duleep mentioned earlier, there's too much going on. If we can buy better tools and are much more intuitive and spend a little more effort and even a little more dollars into making sure we're buying systems that integrate much better. And then we bring that level of sense to our decision makers. So when they go and evaluate tools and maybe IT isn't at the table with them, we give them enough knowledge that they're looking more with a keen eye of, how is this going to scale? Because a lot of departments and certainly our teachers aren't always looking at that. They find a really cool piece of technology or a really neat idea that might work initially, but when you scale that out across 1,000 people, maybe there's different questions that they need to ask. And so developing those relationships, understanding the shared context, I think is something that we often look for as a pillar for success. And that's hard to do sometimes. It's definitely a cultural thing. We can't buy a tool off the shelf that helps with that. So it's about building those bridges and everything else too.
Absolutely. Great points from both of you. So we have just a couple of minutes left here. So I'd like to open it up to both of you. Are there any other key points that you'd like to share or words of wisdom for our audience today?
Yeah, I think invest in staff training, whatever the tool you bring in or whatever the application you're looking, the staff training, I think helps tremendously on how you implement things and how you maintain things going forward. Also, don't be afraid to have good relationships with staff augmentation outside, right? And because that's where you can bring in the professionals to really set something up complex, and then when they operationalize it, you can take it over to maintain it, right? Those are things kind of that will make your organization move faster and implement things, and rock solid, rather than if your staff is not right there to do something bigger, you don't want to burden them by putting them on and say, hey, I want to give them a chance to do this, knowing very well that there's a huge chance that it can fail. So you want to bring the expertise when necessary, and then make sure that then it is operationalized before you can take over if you don't have the skill set.
Good. Matt?
Yeah, I would just like to add, thank you to NetTrio, Kyle, and all of your whole great team there. I think it's finding and working with companies like you. One reason we found you is our old monitoring system was just nickel and diming us for every single thing we wanted to monitor. And what the end result of that was, we had a finite budget. And so we had to literally choose, well, I guess that's not important enough to monitor for the money that we have. And so you guys made it very easy. And that was several years ago. And I would say you are helping to create that model of working back and forth with your customers, right? So it's that partnership again. We're not just a client, you're not just a vendor. You provided a tool that met our need financially. You definitely provided a tool that met our need from a capability wise, but then you've got NUGGET going now. You've got your customer advisory boards. I think you're updating the tool. Oh shoot, I'm seeing emails all the time about a new update coming out. You guys are very responsive. And so I just want to thank you. I think that's another eye opener that we've had over the last several years is we're really trying to identify those companies who are listening to their end users and what they need, because that's so huge. And that's where you see that churn of you buy a different vendor every 3 to 4 years because they aren't listening. And it's the vendors who do listen. And when we find a shortcoming for us anyway, you've got your feature request systems and your advisory boards, like I mentioned, and maybe we don't get our Val Verde's favorite feature tomorrow, right? But if enough people ask for it, we definitely know it's heavily considered. And so that's the last thing I guess I would add to this whole conversation is finding tools and partners that you can work with that help truly, help you meet your goal. And that's by using tools that are robust and they constantly listen to ideas we have. And you invite us into the conversation like this. So
I got to echo what Matt's saying. I mean, after all, it's only my third install in 8 years, right? So I haven't skipped a beat since I think 2012 or 9 years, I think, from bringing NetTrio in. Yeah, you guys do a lot of listening, and that really helps. It's an example most companies should take, large or small. It's just listening to your customer because that's what you're there for. Eventually, I know you want to also make money, but if having a great product, I think is key to it. Listening to customers is key to making a great product.
Well, on behalf of the NetTrio team, we absolutely love working with both of you and your organization. So gentlemen, again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always a pleasure speaking with you both and learning from you. For everyone in the audience, don't forget to connect with Duleep and Matt within the NUGGET platform, as well as on LinkedIn or any of the other social media channels they've shared in their profiles. If you have any additional questions for Matt or Duleep, you can get in touch with them on those channels, or you can reach out to the NetTrio team and we'll be happy to pass those questions along. So thanks everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at the rest of the breakout sessions throughout the day.
Thank you for having us.
thank you.